Welcome to all our friends from around the world. This is your host, Abhay Wadhwa, welcoming you to our latest episode of the AWA Agora Show. We're just delighted that we have this opportunity to welcome stalwarts in our field like Jiren Karim, who's our guest today, to our talk show. As most of you who have been on the show before or have heard the podcast, we love to have conversations similar to inviting them to our living room, having a cup of tea or having a glass of wine, and talking about what they do in service to humanity, in helping people, and in working with the built environment. Today's guest, Jiren Karim, is the director of Biogeometry Systems, and she shuttles between Cairo, Zurich, and Vancouver. Since I first heard her speak, I've been fascinated by the depth of knowledge, that has gone into this field. Of course, the company and the work was started by her father about 50 years ago, Dr. Ibrahim Karim. She has been able to develop it and really take the message to several people who internationally in our community as well, architects, lighting designers, people who are working with energy systems. And she focuses on how shapes can enhance harmonic qualities of face. So the topic is really engaging. We've had her as a guest before. What we're going to talk about today is going to be slightly different than what has been done a year ago and season one. Please join me in welcoming Jiren Karim. Jiren, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And speaking of my father, I see him right there.
Yes, I do too. Yes.
Traveling.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So we're honored to have him here today. That's fantastic. So welcome, Dr. Karim. It's truly a pleasure. How have you been?
I've been good. How have you been? I like the idea of just, I have my coffee. So sitting, having coffee, chatting with a friend.
Exactly. And one day soon we'll do this in person in New York City or Cairo or wherever we can meet. So, but I know that you also had COVID, but did your quarantine and did all of those things and everything is good. And how's work though? I mean, are you still doing a lot of workshops? Or are you traveling around?
We got to take our courses online, which was quite interesting because a lot of our work is practical in the courses that we teach. So there was a little bit of a learning curve there, but I think it worked out well in terms of bringing biogeometry to more people, kind of like the AWA Agora is also connecting more people and bringing them together. So I think we were able to ride the positive side of that for sure. Of course, there's delays in actually getting to different sites and doing some of the work and different things, but so far, so good. I can't complain, touch wood. And it's how are things on your end? New York?
Yeah, New York's slowly getting back to normal. So, I would say that, if you're vaccinated, it's pretty much back to normal. Of course, everyone's wearing a mask as they should. And we are working half and half, half from home, half from our studio in Chelsea in New York City. And it's nice to be back in the space. There's a little bit of learning curve of getting back to commuting and getting into the space. But what I'm feeling very optimistic about is how things are unfolding internationally, in terms of projects restarting. And I know that a lot of our architect friends from internationally are really looking forward to, hearing the recording. And I think a lot of our focus today would be on what it means, the work that you do, biogeometry, what is the direct relevance to a practicing architect, whether in whichever part of the world. I mean, and you would be the best person to answer it because you come from a long lineage of architects, your father, your grandfather. So I think the difference between the first show that we did with you on December 12th last year and now is that today we'll be talking more about the architectural connects.
To answer the question, I'm just going to refer to the idea of what biogeometry brings to architecture. So as part of my background, do come from a lineage of architects. Sorry to say, I'm not an architect myself, but I do think my background is actually psychology as well as graphic design. So a lot of the work that I do is actually consulting architects in their existing plans and designs for how they can bring in biogeometry principles. And to explain what biogeometry principles are, or what it can lend itself into architecture, is that it's a form, in my opinion, and this is also coming in now, I'm also a building biologist. So in building biology, we study the different effects of things like natural building materials, electromagnetic radiation, really how we can create this healthy home, looking at your home as this third layer of kind of your energy exchange system. So biogeometry brings a completely new aspect to that, in that it's a science of shape. So we deal with, so of course, when it comes to architecture and we talk about different shapes, there is things that architects take into consideration when we come to shaping a house, such as airflow, such as obviously the distribution of rooms, but very rarely does, or I haven't seen it outside of biogeometry, does an architect have the language or the understanding of how they can actually assess the shape of the building on health. I think a lot of people, for example, might be familiar with things such as architects who maybe use different types of earth colors in their architecture because of different types of calming effects, or for example, different shapes related to acoustics, right? So different acoustics differently for a restaurant, for an office, for a theater. But now we come to a whole new field of actually looking at the shape of the building in regards to human health. And one example that I can give, in Egypt, my father being a professor of architecture, he actually has a lot of students who will do their masters and PhDs in biogeometry, and he will come in as a supervising professor. And so this is an excerpt here that you see in the slides. This is an excerpt from one of the theses that he was overseeing. So this is a PhD, you can see here, a PhD awarded in 2014 by Cairo University. Now the idea here was to look at biogeometry's effects. Here I think it was building a type of kind of rehab center or spa, and looking at biogeometry's effects in helping create this environment that would be naturally health inducing, or naturally help bring back, so you can see here depression by signature, naturally help with things like anxiety and depression, and help with recovering from addiction and other things like that. And so the student used shapes that we have in one of the books called Biogeometry Signatures, and created a design strip. Now, the reason I think that this adds a lot to architecture isn't just the results, but actually the reaction of the university at first when she presented her design thesis. The design thesis, the university didn't think to ask for any type of medical testing or any kind of testing to show the effect on health. And this is actually what we're trying to change in biogeometry, is we're saying there should be a conversation between the medical department in a university and the design department. And in that view, we can look at it, we can look at architecture, we can look at your home as a form of preventative medicine. And, you know, when the university called and they said, stop sending us your students, you know, my father said, why would we stop unless they're not getting any results? But as long as they're getting results, then it makes sense that we start viewing architecture as a type of environmental support for human health. And you know, I mean, I didn't also mention lighting, and there's a huge aspect there as well when it comes to health and sleep. And so here you can actually see, so in this one, what they actually did is they, the university set up an experiment. So the experiment that they decided on with the student was to check the effect of this design strip that she had created using biogeometry shapes on serotonin levels in depressed mice. So just one of the neurotransmitters that would be an indication of the effect of biogeometry. And so you can see here on the side, so you can see the control. You can see the serotonin levels of the depressed rat. You can see the effect with biogeometry. So that's the biosignature. And then this is in comparison to two other drugs here. So a combination and two other drugs. And you can see all around that biogeometry is basically, I mean, the numbers are very, I would say, better the drug interventions, with a few cases where it's equal and maybe one or two cases where it's less, but very close. So you can see here, for example, if I just take a random row, so, 63 with biogeometry, 68 with the drug, 58, and then 40 something. I can't see this number because of my screen. And then here, for example, in the first one, you're seeing biogeometry is at 70, and then the two other drug comparisons are much lower.
So this design strip that she used, what do you have a visual of what it looked like? Because I clearly see the linkages here that you're comparing it base case with a biosignature strip, and then doing a combination of two individual and then two of them together. And the results from the biosignature are winning pretty much every time except for one at the bottom, number 9, which is 6. Yeah, but the rest of it is, or a few of them actually, but most of it is making a big difference. But what is that strip that she was using? Was it...
So it's one of the shapes, and I wish I had it here. I can always add it in the show notes.
Okay.
Send it over, but it's one of, we have a list of biogeometry shapes. So this is one related to, I think it's called, anybody who has a biogeometry book, it's called the relaxation biosignature. It's one of them, and it's just a strip. It just looks kind of like a type of squiggly line here that's created. So all of these, for example, this, for example, is a biogeometry shape that I'm wearing. And so you can imagine creating a type of design strip to place in the space. So also following this, I'll show you another example. This was the first appearance of Biogeometry in Veranda magazine. And actually it looks, and this is a nice example of how easy it is to incorporate biogeometry into the space, because the other one, I'll send it over. You'll see it's a design. It's not something you'd see in every space, but here, if you were just to look, it's hard to actually see the biogeometry elements, but it's right here on the top all around. There's very specific angles and shapes being used. And you can see the article is called Calm. And the reason for that is that the editor of the magazine said when he went to visit this apartment that was done with biogeometry elements by interior designer Michael Keith, he said that it was the first time that he felt his cameraman calm. So that's where he gave the name of this. That's where he gave the name of this article. And
so you're saying all of that detail is in the cornice or on the banding on the top, and there's a specific type of form and shape that's gone into this architectural detail, and that's emitting.
It's a very simple also shape. It's just a 90-degree angle with a quarter circle in the middle.
Yeah.
But
and then it's
does
got
a lot to diffuse energy in the shape.
Gotcha.
So it's and then also here, the one below is just 45-degree angle. So it's the 45-degree in combination with the 90 and the quarter circle that's giving us this full effect.
And all of this information can also be found on in the book that Dr. Karim has written.
I don't know if the how-to so much. I mean, the shapes are there.
Okay.
For sure. I mean, even this shape, actually, the shape I'm wearing now, this is what we call the L90, is based on that cornice design that we're just talking about now. So they're all there. It's just maybe the incorporation that needs to be studied, or what we really teach in the beginning for how to begin to bring in these principles. But he's given talks to introduce these principles to design students in a few hours. The main idea, I mean, I'll go back to where we left off kind of in our last talk. And we talked about the project in Switzerland. And I think this is important to mention again, it's a really good case for the future that we believe biogeometry can help bring. And it's here you can see, so biogeometry is a quality of life solution. So this is, so when I was first learning how to present and go into different meetings with my father, and I remember this was one of the best ways that I thought that he presented biogeometry, that he showed people and he said, so let's look at this as a quality of life. And he removed some of the titles and he said, so now let's look at a society. If you were to place society today, and we just thought about people having complaints, whether it's about their physical health or their mental health, where would you place society in this graph? And most people, they would pick the graph on the left. Very few people that you meet today actually come and say, I have perfect mental health. I have zero physical complaints. And I'm talking about things, I'm not talking about major things, even sleep trouble, a little bit of headaches, different things like that, anxiety. So most people would pick the graph on the left. And then he said, so what if we could turn society to be like the one on the right, where the most common thing for somebody to say is, hey, I'm free of complaints. I feel good. And then, so people go, okay, well, that's great. And then he goes, but this is actually a graph from one of our research projects. And then, so this was done in Hamburg in Switzerland. There was a cell tower that was installed, and people started having different health issues when this cell tower was installed. So there's a very good on our YouTube channel. If anybody just goes to youtube.com/biogeometry, they'll find a playlist of different aspects of that project and different people, different residents speaking as well. And so basically there was a cell tower installed in the church, and then the residents started having a lot of complaints, to the point where some actually moved to live underground in their homes, like they were staying in the basement, just to get relief from some types of physical effects. So my father, having graduated from ETH in Zurich, a friend of his knew of the work and some of the environmental aspects. He's been talking about things like electromagnetic radiation and geopathic stress and things for a while. So he called him for a solution. And the solution, I mean, like I mentioned, biogeometry is a science of shape. So the solution really was, if you look at the towers in Hamburg, part of it, not the entire solution, but you'll see that we actually installed shapes directly at the back of each antenna. And then the residents moved from the graph we see on the left to the graph we see on the right, where we're saying free of complaints. And this is, of course, an independent study. And you can see here, so like I was mentioning, you can see here the main complaints. So things like nervousness, sleeping disorders, difficulty sleeping, exhaustion, irritability, allergies. So the idea here is also, I think the important thing now to show as well, is the role that, looking at the subtle energy environmental background, how much of the information or the quality of our environmental energy affects our health. Because if looking now at all of these 15 items below and seeing that it helps support feeling relief from every single one of these, this now lends itself more to talking about the importance of the health of our environment, whether it's through biogeometry or any other means, just looking at the environment as a whole. They always, this idea where they say, if you have a plant that just needs, water and sunlight, and you sit and just try to give it all of these other solutions, it just needs water and sunlight to thrive. That on its own can help take care of a lot of problems. And that's a good example of what happens when you place the body in the right environment and you reduce some forms of stress on it. And you see the same thing here. One of the big things as well that ended up happening is a lot of people started complaining of different types of psychological issues: nervousness, weakness, irritability, depression. And you can see here, I mean, what's interesting is that you have, when we come now to the head and the mental and psychic complaints or psychological complaints, you see that we had 0 residents who were free of complaints. Now this was, you could call this a small kind of pilot study, but then when it came out in the news, it was repeated. So we went from one town and repeated this in another town in Hirschberg, Switzerland, with the same results. And you can actually see here, so you can see this is a letter from the canton of Appenzell, who is saying they're thankful for the results. And what's interesting also in the YouTube video I mentioned, you can even see some of the I don't remember his exact position, but somebody was working with us, and when they saw the relief of people from kind of the after and the before biogeometry, they even began to understand the importance of environmental energy and how people feel. And then you have,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just very quickly, 2 quick questions that have come into me directly. One is, this is in 2002, so we are talking about, and these are mobile phone antennas, so we're talking about 2G at that time, right? And now we're at 5G.
So that's 2005, and then the last time we were back there when they updated, I want to is 2016 or 17.
Oh,
So we went back there to do the update. And then about 3 months ago, there was another update, and we worked with the residents as well to ensure biogeometry is there every step of the way.
okay, fantastic. And the other question that's come in, and you could probably answer it now or afterwards, whichever way you like, is what did you actually do with the antennas? I mean, what shape did you put in?
So it's called, if you even go on Google and somebody just writes Hamburg or Hamburg emitter, there'll be photos of the antenna with the shape in the back. It's in the book as well. And
Okay.
it'll look like a long shape, and it has different types of configurations and number qualities put together. So you can see that. And then there was other aspects, of course, that were handled. So I would say that it's not just the tower on its own that we looked at, it's really the environment as a whole. So there were other shapes in the home.
Gotcha.
Looking at different areas. So we actually, so for example, so from Hamburg and Hitchburg came a solution that we call the home kit. So we tried to, I actually have, this is older one here, but all of the shapes that we put in the ground, we have this, has all of these shapes here. So these look like little notches, but they're actually some of the shapes that were buried in Hitchburg and then also placed in the tower in Hamburg. And so we tried to create a solution so people can have these shapes in their home. And as part of that, though, we always look at the environment as a whole. So even if we give somebody a shape to put in their environment, we actually have solutions that go directly on, the incoming water in the home, the electric panel, the windows, which we call energy keys moving through the space. So we really try to look at it as a total overall environmental solution for the best support for the body.
Gotcha. So related question, if I may, is that, say, let's look at a hypothetical situation, right? That there is a developer that's doing a master plan for a 45 acre site, right? And it's a mixed use project. You have a hotel, you have retail, you have, standard stuff, commercial, residential with a big lake in the middle, artificially made lake in the middle. So they said, you know what, we would love for biogeometry to be involved in this project. How would you work with them? I mean, what are the steps in the process? Do you come in the initial stage when they're conceptualizing and add elements? Or are you coming in, what stage do you come in and how do you work then?
So ideally, ideally can go in and just help. A lot of times when we're going in, let's say that the initial master plan is already in place. And maybe an idea of what the project will look like is already in place. And then we see how we can blend it in with biogeometry design principles. So one of the things that we try to do, and this is also part of the reason we try to teach, is that if you see, for example, there's a few projects, of course, that my father did on the Red Sea. And if you look at those designs, they are very geometric in nature. And the name biogeometry itself. So what we try to explain is that we're not trying to create a style. We're actually trying to show that we show design principles so that it can be incorporated into any style. So that's actually one of the reasons that you find that a lot of times what we love to do is support different architects and designers in their own design versus coming in and saying, let's do it that way, because then it'll end up being a type of, every artist, every designer has a touch to them, so then it'll be looking like a different, like our style or our approach. So normally what we would like to do, sometimes we get the initial master plan. And if we go, so let me go a little bit into the history here. So when we talk about biogeometry, okay, so the birth of biogeometry came from looking at power spots. Okay, so this is where the history of architecture and looking at these ancient sites, these ancient men and how they interacted with the environment, we find that there's very specific places that were very, I think we had mentioned this also in our earlier talk where we said in a lot of sacred sites, if you build, you'll find an earlier site and you'll find this transition. So this is an important thing to understand, because whenever we talk about energy, and this is for all also alternative practices out there. So the reason we can actually develop an environmental science is because we have access to, through power spots, we have access to an energy quality that is beneficent for everybody. right? So we still have to move. So even if you work with different energies, a lot of these are still polarized in nature. Now we go into power spots and we find energies that are beneficial of it, kind of like how we would want to bring in clean air to a city. It's a type of something that's beneficent to everybody. So from an energy perspective, these power spots and are, since the dawn of humanity, the places that will give us the access to what we call this centering quality that naturally will rebalance us into our best state. And so when we look at how these were dealt with in history, so first we find something like the menhir. Okay, so the menhir is these megalithic stones that were usually they had a high quartz content, and you would place them on these power spots, allowing them to resonate with the energy of bandit in the area. Okay, so this is also one of the biggest secrets behind the pyramids. Okay, so a lot of people try to recreate the effect of the pyramids of Giza by doing things like recreating the pyramid shape without being aware that it's basically, if you look at this menhir and I need the power spot to activate the menhir. So the menhir, if it radiates energy, we need to ask what kind of energy is it radiating. So that's the same thing with the Giza pyramids. One of the biggest secrets to it is actually the location that it's in. We see an obelisk in mathematical proportions lends itself to things like the church tower, the mosque minaret. Now, when we understand that, now we can go to one of the first examples in town planning, for example, or doing a master plan. And so if we look here as well, we can see, for example, that there's types of, looking at the pyramids, there's types of earth energy grid alignments that the pyramid is placed on. And it's where we find the most crossings. And usually you found underground water crossings as well beneath, create this energy. So our first step in a master plan is actually, okay, so where are these spots on the site? We need to find them. And that's really one of the keys that biogeometry gives us, is how can we find these spots and how can we work with them? So when we find it, you know, we don't need to do things like erect a menhir in the site, but we need to think of how are we going to incorporate it, right? And so this becomes now, once we have these power spots, how are you as an architect going to make this the heart of your city? Okay, one of the big things in Hamburg was that the cell tower was placed in the church, and this was the heart of their city. And so when you come in and you actually added this negative aspect to the heart of their city, you create a tension in the city without being aware of that. So one of the thank you letters actually came, and it said, "Thank you for bringing back peace to our community." And so the idea now would be, okay, so now that we have this, now that we know where these sacred spots are, or these centering energy qualities exist in the site, how do we use them for, if we go back to the pharaohs, you know, you would place things like the pharaoh's home, but you can use them for things like schools, right? You can use them for markets, you can use them any places of gathering. And then you know, kind of, I like to kind of think of it like a beating heart. So once you have your heart and you have this network, how do we radiate this energy through a network of pathways and of people?
Nice.
We're always going in and out, in and out.
Nice.
So
it's
that
a beautiful example. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, absolutely. But the big question is, how do you measure? Yeah.
So we use a lot of times pendular instruments, but there is an aspect now where the easiest way to measure to detect a power spot, to work with environmental energies, we need a scale that allows us to detect all the energies that a human body is sensitive to. So in different times, so in for example, in history, a lot of times if you find out how they would select power spots, they would do things like just place meat in different areas and see how long it took to rot, or the rate of fermentation of milk. You can look at different types of animals where they actually go to when they're sick. So those are all examples. So observation was a really big thing. And then of course today there's a lot of, you know, modern methods of detecting different types of qualities in the soil and different things that may not lend themselves to actually detect a power spot, but can tell you that you have a positive spot or something that is
negative.
Now we use, actually there's different angles and numbers that are in resonance with these spots. And one of them that would be familiar with a lot of the architects here is the number 16. So the number 16 is a number that we find actually starts on its own naturally having this energy quality. Okay, so it's as part of the biogeometry language, one of the things we talk about is this concept of the interchangeability of scales. Basically, when we look at the environment as a whole, we place a scale. So imagine, for example, if we look at sound as an energy quality, we can see that we can hear resonance between different notes. Right. But if we consider now light, we can't see a resonance between different colors. But if we actually now, we imagine just expanding our scale. So we look at color, sound, smell, touch, taste, all as these interchangeable qualities. And when we do that, we actually have pendulum instruments that we move. They're plexiglass instruments, and every time we move this dial lock on top, we get a different angle. And that different angle can be used to allow your body to be in a resonance with a different type of quality. So this is neat because then you're shaping the entire environment. You're taking smells, sound, touch, taste all together.
Yeah.
And measuring the effect on the body. So you can use different things such as the angle. And we even have a pendulum. That's why I mentioned the number 16. We have a pendulum with the number 16 to begin to allow you to become sensitive to these energy qualities. For those who are familiar with dowsing, it's not dowsing, because in dowsing, we're getting a relationship with the subconscious. Here, we're just trying to get our body to be sensitive to one quality. So a water dowser could be comparable to this in the sense that sometimes you'll see people dowsing for water, and the resonance that they pick up is because their body is mostly water.
Yeah. But this is
so
different.
It's actually a resonance between quality.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I do want to repeat this for our listeners, that this is not dowsing. This is not dowsing. This is not tapping into your subconscious, but it's more of measurement and aligning with what you're looking for, right?
Yes, more of training your body to be sensitive to what we would call energy qualities. And so creating and so you see here actually, so the physics of quality, one goal is to create this abstract. Now, of course, once we have that, then you can test on human health. You can use biofeedback testing. You can use neurofeedback testing. You can test. One of the things, it's always, and here we go. So this is a slide that says, why is the cow smiling? Because in Hamburg, somebody came out and said, well, this is a placebo effect. And so this woman came up and she said, sir, our cows don't speak Arabic. So a lot of the testing that we actually do is with animals. So, another example of health that we have is that in Quebec, where we've been working for years now with a company as a solution to raise chickens without antibiotics. So we placed biogeometry shapes in the space, and they were able to call antibiotics.
So, I mean, if you take that example that you just gave further, the carcinogens which are connected to geopathic stress, right? I mean, things that cause cancer and other body ailments can definitely be helped with biogeometry, right?
Yes, I mean,
we're already doing it. Yes. So why doesn't every hospital just embrace that?
So there's a few things, right? So first of all, finding geopathic stress. And so this is where finding geopathic stress. So there's dowsing became extremely, and that's why I said, if anybody's aware of dowsing, there was a time when we talk about, and I think this is also those interested can hear about how my father got the knowledge of French anesthesia, or this type of vibrational anesthesia that we speak about, because it actually wasn't common anymore. And dowsing became the more prevalent way of working with energies. And there are times when dowsing is very open to autosuggestion. With physical anesthesia, if you're trained, it's a little bit different. And the reason I'm saying that is because we actually have, my brother runs what we call the Biogeometry Environmental Home Solutions Department, and he will train practitioners to go into people's homes. And as part of their training, there is a double-blind testing to find the geopathic stress in the space. And so we've seen it now with hundreds of people going in and passing this double-blind testing. Now, just mentioning geopathic stress, and if people aren't familiar clear with what it is. So there's a few things where, of course, if you can't detect it today with some kind of device, like a EMF meter or or any kind of meter, then you're kind of in hot water. And there are people out there actually who do I've heard different types of things where people say there's certain types of, radioactivity at the edges of lines or things like that, but it's still not at the point where I've seen anything. I haven't seen anything electronic reliable at testing this. And so, but here now we look at that of Gustav Von Paul. And basically what he did is he chose an area of Germany. So there, at that time, there was this idea of, hey, we know what's causing cancer. We know what's causing some different types of effects. It was an area in Germany that had the highest incidence of cancer and mapped out the grids. And then you can see here, without knowing the records of the town with the policeman following him around. And then he found that 80% of the cancer cases were concentrated in 10% of the area. And he had basically this scale where he was doing the intensity of the lines. And he had an extremely high correlation for lines with cancer, for lines that he deemed as a 9 strength or higher. When this happened, some people said, okay, so he picked the area with the highest incidence of cancer, so it's skewed. So he did the same thing with an area that had the lowest incidence of cancer. And then you can see here the Berlin Center for Cancer Research accepted and published his studies, and he released his own book. Now, why this isn't part of knowledge in hospitals and with practitioners and different things. It's I think also because it's if we look today, things that can cause cancer, and even though this may be major and it should be spoken about, our healthcare system is about treating you when you're sick, and a lot of times the solutions also, we're very lucky in biogeometry that my father is a professor, because we get to have students doing their masters and their PhDs, and they're going in and able to actually to bring about this multidimensional example of health within their university work. But I think that's a very unique example to alternative practitioners. People actually have this opening to them. But what we do have now is people who are working to support health, whether it's architects, whether it's alternative medicine practitioners, anything like that. They're seeing that they're not getting the results that they want. It's trying to get this knowledge to as many people as possible now and hit the ground running and hopefully create this idea. I mean, a while ago, my father created this Facebook group called Biogeometry, the Utopia Dream City. And we forgot about it, and people were posting things, and I don't know what happened, but maybe 4 or 5 days ago, all of these requests of people saying, I want to join, I want to join, I want to join. And so I feel like it's coming out in people's consciousness to realize we can do better.
Yeah.
We can do better as we can create this environment. The idea of biogeometry, if we understand it as a design language, it's actually, so with the ancients, we find that there was this concept of preserving life force and preserving what they call natural forming process in everything that they do. So if you think of something like Pythagoras, or this is the temple in Man and Luxor, which was designed using specific archetypal human proportions. There is something in there that makes the temple alive because of this.
Sure.
And so when we understand how to measure energy, we can do this in everything we design. And I was mentioning the number 16 because I was actually saying that some architects here may already be doing this by designing with the golden ratio.
Right.
That's one example. It's one of many proportions that can be used, where we can go, what's possible.
I think one of the first things that, we should be doing as people in the education field and outreach is that we should insist on, or we should take this topic to schools of architecture, saying that this is, what they call invisible architecture, of looking at the ley lines and the curry lines and all of those other underwater lines. And maybe this should be, a 2-semester course that's taught. That listen, this is really important, because if your buildings are not aligned with natural forces, then you have disease, ailments, everything. And I mean, one of the classic examples that I have used is that when I would travel for work, there was one particular city where there was one particular intersection that every time I passed through it, there was an accident. There was an accident every time I passed through it. It was uncanny that every day there was an accident there, right? And somebody banged into somebody. Then the local people put up a little temple there, and they say, well, all the accidents went away, but that's connected to your, the Menher example that you gave, and the whole point of these energy fields kind of coming out with the negativity. Yeah. And so, I mean, your subject matter is so compelling. I'm just one of the mysteries of life and why this is not mainstream. When you say alternative practitioner, I'm like, this should not be alternative. This should be mainstream practitioner,
It shouldn't. And I think, I mean, like I said, I'm hoping that some of the things that we do are going to turn heads. I mean, I'll show you. This was one of the last theses that I saw. And this was basically also looking at the effects of Wi-Fi. And it doesn't have to be, I mean, okay, so for some people, if you go into a place and you talk about geopathic stress and you talk about electromagnetic radiation, you might lose them right away. Right now, if anybody thinks the research isn't there for electromagnetic radiation having an effect, they're wrong. And they can go into things like the Bioinitiative report. They can go and look at a lot of different professors speaking out. But that's on its own creating this type of tension in the way that we enter the situation, and it doesn't have to be that. I mean, one thesis that's happening right now that I saw my father overseeing, and it's actually with somebody in New York, is designing a chair to deal with office stress. And at this point, we've also had one just also dealing with drivers' stress. I mean, you can relate that to electromagnetic radiation as well, but just also driving for many hours. Even things like, I mean, here you can see what different effects on water crystal shape, frozen water crystal shapes. But going back to this, I mean, you can see this was thesis in that you had different types of testing that they would put mice through, common testing practices, not ones that we came up with again, to look at the effect of Wi-Fi radiation. And then you had a biogeometry designed home for them. And you can really see that in the results of the study, you can see that under the effect of Wi-Fi within the biogeometry designed house, they didn't show a lot of the stress responses that were common to see with the Wi-Fi router there. And then you can see all the different principles as well that student did. So hopefully, just the more types of examples we have of this, the more that, one day the university is going to come and say, hey, come put this as part of your curriculum and let's do that. And I, there's been one or two opportunities when it's happened. But I think it's just actually, now that universities are considering online, I think it will open the door to that, because in the past, what happened is that we had to, when the offers came in, it would have had to mean moving to that location.
Yeah, but now we can do it online. Yeah. Well, Jiren, I could speak all day with you, and we are getting close to our time. So I wanted to keep time for about 2 questions, but maybe you want to take another few minutes to wrap up, and then I can pose the 2 questions for you.
We can jump into the questions, and then
okay.
I can
Sure.
have time for those.
Okay, so the one thing that came in is a question from, it's a long one, so I'll just read it to you. There's a regionally well-known valley of pyramids in Bosnia in the town of Visoko. These are said to be more than 11,000 years old, structures that are now covered with soil, grass, and trees, but they're intertwined with underground tunnels and passages that are saturated with negative ions with universal healing properties. They developed post-COVID recovery program and many other programs for MS, and MS, the multiple sclerosis one, is very efficient, they say. Have you heard of this? And are there similarities with the biogeometry aspect that you spoke about? Yeah, Visoko. Visoko is the name of the place.
Yes, it is, and I also know the person who my father knows him well as well. The one who actually goes in and lectures about and about their healing properties. Of course, you have the same BG3 energy quality, right? So it's not just biogeometry ties. So what's interesting in biogeometry is you have a common ground between all sacred sites.
Right.
All these healing energies, between all the different types of rituals associated with them. And it's actually by understanding this energy quality that we can begin to unlock a lot of keys. And so in different sites as well. So even in the pyramids, for example, there's tunnels here. There's a lot of talk tunnels beneath the pyramids. And if you go in and you trace using something like a BG16, BG3 pendulum, you'll see that you could probably follow the paths of many of these tunnels. And so, you know, we would, if anybody's looking for anything like that, we would always implore them to use this type of technology. We have a few archaeologists who took the courses in Egypt, and they're telling us that it is being used. I haven't seen it personally, but they told us, you know, a few archaeologists that took the courses, they're using it, they're getting results. Yeah, of course, there's a, but
Okay.
I mean, one, my father was receiving an award for pyramid research in Chicago in 2014. And that was actually also one of the locations where you could see all of these different people who have an interest in pyramids all in one room. And it was really nice to see that we were able to, through biogeometry, just ground all of the information and knowledge related to this in one place.
Fantastic. Yeah. So the next question is, you touched upon the distinction between dowsing and biogeometry. Can you tell us, I know this is a big question, but the overlaps between biogeometry and Vastu? Vastu being, I mean, you know what that is, but for the audience, the ancient art of building from the Vedas in the Indian culture.
Okay, so there's two aspects here. I see my father under his camera. If you want to jump in at any time as well, he's just, so I was going to say with Vastu and Feng Shui, and even going back to ancient Egypt, now, there's a few things there. So one is that a lot of these traditions understand what exactly I was talking about, the multidimensionality of the human being and their energy exchange with the environment. So they actually build homes or build or use different principles, whether it's directionality or different aspects, understanding that there's a complete energy exchange with the human and things like compass directions and proportions and different alignments. Now, what biogeometry does is that it's actually the same answer is the question for the same thing as the pyramids. When you understand the principle, then you can take something like Vastu and Feng Shui and make sure that you're achieving the results for modern times or ancient Egyptian principles or anything. And so things like electromagnetic radiation may not have been addressed in Vastu. Doesn't mean that we can't address them. We can when we understand the principle behind them. And it's the same thing when we understand, even looking at things such as, let's say you're a TCM practitioner, traditional Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
So you might be getting similar, I've seen books that show you similar herbs in North America as you would be using in TCM. But now there's actually an energy aspect to the herbs based on the season they're grown in, based on their location they're grown in. Is our modern environment changing the original energy quality? And so understanding, by being able to measure energy quality, it gives you an answer to all of this.
Yeah, and we saw that we had hosted a plant scientist probably about 6 months ago, Tessa Pocock, and she spoke about this as well in terms of how the nutritional quality of the plants is impacted by how and what it's exposed to in terms of its energy fields, you know. So I think the implications are not just in architecture, but also in nutrition science. It's also in mental wellness and so on and so forth. And I understand the distinction you're making, that if you look at the ancient cultures, whether it's the Egyptians, the Indians, the Chinese, that they had commonalities in how they approached this. And now what we're doing with biogeometry is being able to take a measurement technique, analysis technique, and see how the overlaps connect everything. That's a beautiful definition. Thank you. All right, and we have Dr. Karim. This is a super surprise, and it's wonderful to have you here. And would you like to add to what Durea said?
Well, it's my pleasure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, well, I just like to say that Vastu and Feng Shui are now traditions, ancient traditions. They started earlier than that. They were based on a science. On the science level, we were universal. I mean, science is universal, applicable anywhere in the world.
Right.
Then science had certain applications in certain regions like India and China. And with science being forgotten, Vastu and Feng Shui turned into traditions. Now, as traditions, they cannot be universal. They are linked to space and time.
Yeah.
So they are linked to the location and they're linked to space, to time. To the location, of course, you can see that because, for example, the way we prefer the Northeast in Vastu, but actually in Feng Shui, it's the opposite because it's a different region. So here, they have become traditions. Now, when they have become traditions, they're fixed geographically, but also fixed in time. That means that they cannot cater for modern technology and the problems that we have now. In their time, there was no man-made electromagnetic radiation and chemical pollution and all that. So if the science behind Vastu and Feng Shui was still there, I'm sure that Vastu and Feng Shui would have developed to cater for modern technology and to cater for different regions in the world. It's a mistake many people do, that they apply certain principles of Vastu or Feng Shui in different geographical locations with different properties, and it doesn't work. So unfortunately, the sciences are not there today behind them, but I would say that the sciences behind Vastu and Feng Shui would have been something very similar to what we have in biogeometry today.
Understood. That's beautifully explained. I get it. That when you tie it into making it into a tradition, which has its dogma and the space and time issue, then the universality of it is impacted. But in terms of the science, if we go back, how many 5,000 or whatever number of years back, that the science part of it connected it. And now the biogeometry is helping us deal with the new things that humankind has created, with the EMF and the chemicals and etc. So that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And I do want to, Dure, thank you for answering those questions on the side, but I do want to quickly state the name of the book again so that our viewers and podcast listeners can go and purchase it, or even just go to your website, whichever way. If you could just share that with us, it would be greatly appreciated. Maybe you can put it
Back to A Future for Mankind. And I think if you just go on Amazon and search Biogeometry,
you should have it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a new book coming out, hopefully in a month or two. We have it with the editor.
Oh, fantastic. And what's that called? Is that the new edition or is it a new book?
New book. I don't know if we have a title. So
until now, it's the physics of quality.
Goes to you.
Fantastic. Well, that's beautiful. That it's the concepts and the science, and the name is, the name is the name. It'll come. Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's all we have time for, and I'm really thankful to you, Durea, for taking the time, and of course to Dr. Karim for being here today. I've always wanted to meet you, and hopefully in the near future I can meet you in Cairo or some other location. So thank you again for all the work that you've done over the past 55 years in this field. And our hope is that in the near future, it's not alternative practitioners that refer to this, but mainstream practitioners, because it's the need of the day, it's the need of the year, that we need to really wake up to all these energy fields that are around us. And the way you explain the whole heart, you use the heart example, that's really quite kind of hitting it on the head, getting the heart into the architecture. So thank you, Durea. Thank you, Dr. Karim. It's really wonderful.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you. Thank you.